Hi everyone, welcome back to Class 101. Bryce Coe here, and today we'll continue to learn about how to utilize the unique characteristics of brush pens, but with a special emphasis on how they can create texture. So for materials, I'm going to be using the same sketch pad as usual, the mixed media, and then for the brush pen, you can choose between either the Pentel or the Kuretake. Since I used Kuretake last time, I'm gonna go with the Pentel today. They can do the same things, it's just the actual feel of the tip that you might have a preference for at this stage. So to start, we are going to just use a reference here as far as kind of having a wide range of things that I want to show you how I tackle. And so this stump here, which has a background image, but it's got a stump and a bunch of mushrooms on it. Let's get to those textural components. I think we'll start with the stump itself. So I'm going to be trying to tackle some of this wood texture first. And let's just get to it. Okay, so for wood, I'm going to start by, let's do this right in the center here. Yeah, see, pre-visualizing that stump, even though it's super simple. So I'm going to kind of draw loosely the top plane. I'm putting in down enough information for me to know what the planes are so that I can kind of still know how the textures that we put on top of the stump need to convey that shape. Really lightly here because it's going to be a lot of mushrooms. So yes, seeing the stump there. And so for harsher textures like tree bark, which is something like that, you're definitely going to want to take advantage of the brush texture, and that means using more of the side of this pen. So the fact that this is organic also means that we don't need to be super precise with any particular line form. It's more just the texture. So you can see like that, if I just do quick brush strokes with this pen, then the pen doesn't have time to kind of grab onto the paper, and so you'll get more of that rough stroke. And so that's just, like, look at that. That almost looks like the bark texture all by itself. And then the slower you go, the more filled in that's going to be. So because it got a little of a dark notch at the top of that stroke, I'm kind of using that to try to convey maybe some of the harsh wood grain there. And then I know that I have moss, but I'm going to do a little bit of wood here, and I'm going to do a longer stroke going from here to here to kind of like maybe say that there's like a root here. I'm not sticking too close to that reference just because we're really worried about texture. So like that. And what's really helpful with the paper choice that we have today is that you see the ridges on the paper. That happens to be kind of what this pen is revealing, in addition to kind of our fast brush work. Okay, so you could do more of this all as you like, just to kind of get a feel for that. And then the top of the wood, nothing too fancy with that, maybe just some really thin line that go in the direction of the way that it does here, which it looks like they converge on the center. So not really tree circles. That's what we're going to go for. And the reason why this is something you want to consider is because on an organic form like this, we're going to have a lot of possibilities for line variation. And this is definitely one of the finest details on the tree, and you can kind of tell if you look at this from a distance because this looks the most uniform. So having the lines there be the most thin, because you don't want it completely blank, but having them be the most thin there is just going to be kind of showing you the low end of the range we're going to go for. So getting into some of that darker ranges, maybe some of this moss area here where there's a lot of shadow, a really fine texture to kind of convey the really small leaves. I'm not sure if that's what they're called on moss, but anyway, let's get to that. So these are a lot more splotchy, and that means that rather than having quick brush strokes, we're going to kind of just like loosely ease in and out of a taper. So a thin and thick taper going in and out to kind of make this feel softer, not as harsh as the wood. So I'm going to try to convey a 3D shape here. And one of the things that you can kind of see with this as well is the rhythm that I'm going for. It's like as something becomes more in the light here, the rhythm is getting slower and slower, and that's because like more light is kind of hitting this and blowing this out, versus down here where things can get a little darker and a little bit thicker as far as the line quality. So there's some other texture. I think just as far as an illustration goes, it'd be nice to break up a lot of this monotony with some of these this grass and larger leaf shapes. So because the leaves are a very delicate shape, in real life, I mean, like the petal, or I don't know, just leaf, I guess, is very thin, and so choosing a thin line weight is a good match. Some of the details of how an actual leaf has some of that those veins coming out. Same with the grass. So the grass, as thin as I can get it, essentially, just to show that the grass is very thin. And sometimes when you make a mistake like I did here, where it got a little bit too thick, blending it into the other elements that you have on the page, perfectly good way to hide some of those mistakes. That's what we'll get into in the next lesson. Just more tips on how I hide my own mistakes or adapt to them. For now, just how to use it practically. Also, having a lighter taper to these is another way to reinforce their thin material. Every line, the goal that I have in mind is how do I help convey the 3D shape. So for grass, it's keeping it thin and making the taper very sharp. Okay. I get obsessed with drawing this again and not teaching a lesson, but it is fun. So let's move on from grass and leaves, and it looks like we have some mushroom shapes here. Not that we really particularly care about drawing any of these, but there's just another opportunity to talk about things we can do with line weight and with our line work. Okay, so I'm just analyzing what I'm about to draw, and these look like very, very thin cylinder shapes that are kind of just warped up and down. They have a soft cap on the top though, so it's a little bit more sphere-like. Just gonna draw some of these. Okay, so after drawing one, I think that the primary thing to think about is essentially using a very thin and delicate line weight for these on the top, and then to help convey the shape, essentially the fact that these guys are creating a lot of shadow using a thicker line weight on the bottom portion. It's just an opportunity to show the light, essentially. So thin on the top, thick on the bottom. So yeah, without getting too much into shading, the thickness of a line can still help convey light information. Thin on the top, where they're lit the best, dark on the bottom. I'm not sure if these guys have any texture underneath. I'm not sure if this model, which seems more like a photo, shows much of that, but usually there's a sort of like texture of underside, which is very like a lot of thin lines like this. Yeah, and it's just good overall if you are using a brush pen, if you're a fan of it like I am, to try to add variety of line when you can, or when it's effective. It is a specific style to use all of the same line weight throughout, and to kind of ignore all of these different techniques that we're talking about right now. But understanding how to do it can mean that like using it sparingly can still be something that's in your arsenal that you can understand and use really effectively if you decide to use it more sparingly. Okay, so I think I just want to also show a little bit more on just a little bit of a rougher texture here with this tree. So this was pretty well lit, but let's say that this is a lot darker, and got a little bit of moss. So underneath the moss that I'm leaving space for, just kind of going a bit faster. So the faster you go with the pen and harsher pressure you put, the more that you'll get sort of like erratic texture, but sometimes like that's what you want, especially if you don't feel like going super detailed with everything. Being a little bit more expressive with your lines means you can fill up a page faster. So if that's also something that's for consideration, like if you want to just do drawings much more quickly, that's something that I often do just because I don't have the patience to be extremely detailed all the way through. Then having this style here that's a little bit just looser, rougher, and more expressive, more abstract even, can be a very valid choice. Over here, instead of drawing in the grass, I'm also deciding on this side, maybe this is like more in shadow, so I'm going to just use taper to draw the silhouette of these shapes. think that's pretty much all I want to talk about for this particular example. Okay, so next up we have a Viking character, and looking at this guy, he's got a lot of cool textures going on. He's got some wood there, got a lot of metal armor, but I'm most excited about the fur on his, is that a scarf? Well, he's got a kind of cool fur cape there, and a lot of nice hair, and what was that, another wooden, oh, a long wooden axe there. So a lot to work with. Gonna try to mostly stay around this zoom size, just because there's so much going on that I want to get to it without taking too long. So let's just jump into it. Going to stick with the Pentel pen, and gonna try to roughly map out what I'm drawing here. So box for the head here, angled box this way for his chest, although it is very round and cylinder. His arms are also very cylindrical, so something like that. Okay, so jumping in. Just going to get some of these features in for orientation, so knowing that the eyebrows, the eyes are facing this direction. Thicker eyebrow. This is a manly man here. And the nose shape. He's got a bit of a furrowed brow as well. Kind of upset at something. Okay, so now we can start getting into the texture of the hair. Basically, quick lines with a very fast rhythm and a light taper, or a taper that kind of indicates the sharpness of that hair. So as for like where to draw the hair, because all of it is hair, right? Kind of mostly do it when you want to indicate the volume of it. So if you want to think of this as like big lumpy chunks, that's one way to kind of like decide to do larger pieces. Or you could also think that you could just kind of do mostly a contour of it. So if you want to stick to just the edges of the hair, I'll do that first, and then I'll go back in and add a little bit more interesting shapes as well. But just doing the outer contour at first, just to show that if you want to just focus on the outer shape, that's totally fine as well. He's got such a large chest that this hair is resting on. That's really what's kind of informing what I'm doing right now. I'm actually thinking about how it's sitting on top of this large chest box. His collarbone would be around here, but instead we have this cylinder of armor, or just, I don't know, is that what kind of holds his cape together of fur? Roughing in those shapes. Very delicate lines, thin line weight, because these are details. Okay. Back to the hair. He's got kind of one strand here like that. This is his ear. I made the line weight a little thicker than the rest of the hair around it, just so that that stands out a little bit as a form. ear on this side. And you know, I think one of the things with using a brush pen is it just requires a lot of patience, knowing that you got to kind of go slow to get some of the control that you might need if you're less used to the pen and how sensitive it can be. You kind of just have to take your time and appreciate the fact that you have to be careful with this thing. If you rush, then you lose a little bit of that control that you need to get the thickness of line that you want where you want it. So, and if you make mistakes like me and you smudge it because the ink takes time to dry, you also just kind of have to live with that sometimes. I think a good strategy that I'm not using here is to kind of go from left to right overall, and then sometimes just knowing to leave alone certain areas once you've drawn them in, or covering them with paper, because that kind of just also helps you decide not to touch an area. Okay, so that's the first pass of the hair. That's mostly the outer shape, but if you want to go in, knowing where you want to like draw these strands of hair as opposed to the outer contour, it's just like looking at like this reference and saying, okay, so there's like one big long kind of blotch of hair that you could define. So still think of it in terms of like chunks or shapes that you're defining with these strokes. These strokes should not be completely random. Sometimes they can be a bit more random when they're just like there for shading, but it is always better to have intention with your lines. Okay, so not too much, but just enough here to kind of give them a little more shape. Defining the head a little bit better there. And the nose. One thing that I'll also do with hair is kind of find the highlight and try to use that to create separation between planes. This is a little bit more like shading, but when you're using a brush pen, this is the best time to kind of take advantage of some of the texture you can get. So here, I'm gonna say this is the box. You can hopefully see my imaginary box here. This is the front plane. Right here is the side plane, and here would be the top plane of that box. So deciding that you want to highlight the a certain part of the hair on the top of the box means that you can kind of draw more of the hair on the sides, make that line weight a little thicker to essentially kind of show that box shape a little stronger. And you can either leave it like how I did, or you can continue to kind of go in on top to make this look more like a highlight as opposed to just that shape. Okay, so now let's move on to the fur, and you can see that with the fur, his fur is very, well, the model here is just like very low res texture, but essentially what we want to do is we want to make sure that it has a clearly defined a material style that's separate from the hair, because you don't want those things to kind of blend together too much. So because these are extremely fine pieces of hair, chunks of hair that are really short, I should say, making the rhythm really consistent here, and your stroke length, keeping that consistent as well, that's what you're going to do to make sure that this has a different feeling. So I think because this hair, the human hair, is using a lot of really thin line weight, I'm going to go for a slightly thicker one and really short, just to kind of make sure that I'm doing something a little different to distinguish it as a material. And his goes just around that shoulder. I wish he had a little more fur, because this is really fun stuff. We'll just kind of exaggerate it maybe a little more. Cool. He's got a little bit of fur on this side, right over here. So yeah, maintaining that kind of language of material on this side, very key to making it clear that this isn't hair, a human beard. This is the fur of his cape. Okay. And I'm going to strengthen the line weight here to also create some separation. I know that I'm about to get into this buckle that comes across. So this is very thin box wrapping around his chest. That kind of emblem there. Very thin line weight for the details once again. He's got some detail like engraving on this emblem if we look super close. In a drawing of this size, we may not care, and I'm smudging this up, but just trying to get to the point that with a drawing this size, if we don't really mind, then it's more important to kind of imply these details than to spend too much time on being really precise, because overall the texture here is that this is metal that's kind of like it was made kind of roughly as well. Like this isn't like laser cut, you know what I mean? This looks like it's some sort of template. Anyway, just going to have an inconsistent line weight there to kind of make that feel a little bit more homemade. That's what I guess my point is. And some cross contour on that helps to show this underlying shape of his very round belly, which I'll get to next. Similar thing with the kind of engraving on this guy. I'm not too worried. I think just having some inconsistent line shape here, or line weight, kind of implying shapes on here. Okay, and next let's go to his chest. So his chest area, what to say about it? I suppose that I wouldn't really worry about the texture until I get the general shape in. So let's just draw that chest, belly. and then the arm here. So the contour shape, or not contour, but the taper here is, we want to show that this arm is its own separate component here, but that it's connected to this armor. So going from a thin line weight to a thick one kind of helps ease those things into each other. And doing cross contour across the arm here, because what I see underneath here is a very cylindrical box for that arm. I'm going to just continue with the arm while I'm over here. So similar for this, like kind of the inner part of the elbow. I'm going to show that that's connected to the forearm. And he doesn't have anything on the actual elbow. But he does have two shapes here. So there's, see that muscle kind of blending into the forearm? That's like kind of visually what we're seeing, like a thin taper of this shape blending in to this one. And he's got fur here. Just do that first before we get back to that chest. Haven't forgot about it, but might as well. And while I'm on fur, I think I can use a little bit more fur up here. Okay, so how to deal with this huge mess of armor? Well, I think I definitely would never bother to draw every single piece of the plates of armor here. Instead, I would do kind of what I mentioned previously, where you're going to want to choose where to do it. And you want to choose places that are going to help inform the shapes of this guy. So you can see in the reference that it gets darker around the armpit and where it transitions to the arm. And that so basically thinking of the places that you would shade, that's also where you want to put details, because those are maybe where they would be getting revealed the most clearly. Like it gets darker here, you can kind of imagine that this area might get more blown out. So I'm also going to just use a different sort of line weight and shape, very thin or very thick and short strokes, just little kind of like little C's here, kind of just the underside of the plate shape that I see. So doing that consistently is kind of what will help create the illusion of the material being, you know, a pattern as opposed to just like completely organic and random. But it doesn't need to be perfect, it just has to be close enough to imply that that's what's happening. And so as far as the rhythm goes, having them be tight in these clusters here, and then fanning out as it gets further and further away from the kind of turn of these shapes where it's darkest, will mean that you don't have to bother with being precise with these armor details, and you don't have to draw all of them, which would take forever. So we might not, it might not be dark here, but it's useful to draw the ones on the side here because this can kind of, these are opportunities to, show that the shape curves most strongly at the ends. In the middle, it's going to be the most flat, and therefore maybe require the least amount of detail. I'm going to try not to smudge here. So here is the top part of this like really large belly. No need to get too much detail here. And then as I get to the kind of underside of the belly, I'm going to define that a little more strongly. Okay, I don't want to skip over the cool helmet and horn, so I'm going to jump to that next. And as far as the shape of it goes, it's a box that's got a cylinder going through it, kind of just like a box shape for the eyes here. It's even got the armor detail to kind of show that this line going across, but instead of a flat head, it's kind of got a stilted half of or like a very ovally spear shape. So just drawing in the contour lines, these large holes here. And then for the horns, these large cylinders that just come to a point. So starting as a normal cylinder, then coming to this point here, because that's the overall shape. Trying to mirror the height there that comes across. And as far as how to make those horns feel more like cylinders as opposed to just two shapes there, we're going to go in with some of our cross contours. And the texture on this guy is really fun. I think there's a couple ways to deal with this, but in this case, because we have a lot of white, not too much shading or dark values on the body overall, and because I want a separation of material here, I'm going to do a bunch of cross contours going along it that try to indicate a rougher texture. So I'm going to go faster and with a lot of taper. So there's speed involved in the stroke, but I'm still going really slow as far as being very deliberate with where I place them. Just trying to trace the cylinder shape underneath. Alright. And now to the armor itself. So this is a metallic shape. I know that this was also metal, but because it was so involved, we didn't want to get too granular on it. But with this guy, I really like how it's got some shine on it. So the best way to do shine with pen is to essentially leave very strong highlights. And highlights means that you're going to do strong value on one side and essentially just leave the highlight in between the strong values. Got a little bit in the inside there of that hole. And one thing that is also important, haven't mentioned yet, is that a lot of times when you draw these lines and you spend a lot of time on them to make sure they're correct, you don't want to cover them up if they're conveying the right shape or form. Don't shade over them. Try to just avoid them like I did here, where you're gonna get right up to that like middle line, for example, that we drew here, and you're just going to leave it alone. It's fine to not fill it in. And that is how I deal with metal texture. I'll strengthen his eyes a bit now. Now that I'm looking at this guy, I think that his beard could be a little bit more prominent. I think looking at him, I feel like his mouth gets a little lost in there. It's this lip. So I'm trying to create some separation of material there from the hair and the skin, and that's requiring me to go into this hair a little bit more to create an overall tone to that material that's a bit darker. Okay, let's just try to mirror some of these shapes over here to get it to a more finished looking state. Another arm. I'll try to go a bit faster to wrap this lesson up. What's happening here? We got some armor. With, I'm going to say, oh, these are straps actually. So the straps aren't too interesting texturally. We can't really do too much with them, so I'm just going to mostly kind of separate them out with value as being dark. And get it to about here, so we can have this kind of joint end around the same height. Here's a box belt buckle. It's got some texture on the front of it. Texture is another engraving that we won't really worry too much about. I know that it's kind of just generally got lines going in a square though. Kind of implying that someone spent a lot of time to make this. Cool. And then we have some rope. So this is going to be a lot of rhythm of the same line, but it's tracing the round shape of his body. What is that? Just more of those medallions. Same on this side. Okay. All right, so that concludes the lesson for today. Next, let's talk about your mission, which will be to draw an object and convey its texture using a brush pen. So let's talk about the mission options you have available for this lesson. For mild, you have this section of a tree, and for this one, I'd just like you to pay special attention to the line taper that you're using. Try to use a thicker line weight on the larger branches versus the thinner branches where you can use a lighter line weight. So next, for the medium option, we have a really cool feathered dinosaur here. And my tip for this one is be sure to remember not to focus on drawing every single feather. Rather, draw those feathers selectively and only draw ones that help to convey the underlying 3D volume. So third, we have the spicy option, where you'll be drawing this kind of a nerdy alligator. And he's got a lot of different objects and textures on him. So my advice for this one would be to use texture to create separation between those different materials. Lastly, for the extra hot option, we have a really cool demon female character. And this one presents a unique challenge because although she's got a lot of different materials going on, they're all kind of painted in a similar way. So your challenge here is to kind of interpret what you're seeing and use your own creativity to make the textures on her have some variety so that they don't all blend together. And those are the 4 options you have available for this class. Before we go, let's do a quick recap on what we did today. We worked more with brush pens and learned how they can be used to create different textures. In the next class, we'll be drawing an illustration together, but with a specific emphasis on how to deal with mistakes. This is one of my favorite lessons because mistakes are just a fact of life, and hopefully some of my strategies will be really helpful to you guys as well. All right, looking forward to seeing you guys then. Bye.